Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. I got Jonathan B. Smith here on the program, and we call him the Chief Optimizer and a specialist in EOS. And before you get started and introduce your guest, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I help businesses get business traction, get what they want from their business, not only know what they want, but actually make it happen. So that's what I do as Chief Optimizer.
Awesome. And your guest today?
Sid Jaffe, my government contracting expert.
Very good. And why don't you go ahead and start off with the first question, Jonathan?
Well, the first question is, how did I meet Sid? I belong to a club in D.C., a business club. D.C.'s a networking kind of town. Sid holds court at the Tower Club in D.C., and I actually ended up connecting with him, and he was generous enough to introduce me to a bunch of folks. So networking is off.
Jonathan and I work in a kind of a tag team perspective because while Jonathan takes strategic to tactical, with traction, I literally take that traction and go down to tactical actions for government contractors with my firm.
Oh, okay. Okay. And kind of give us a little more information about what your firm does.
Well, we're 23 years old. We've worked with 1,700 government contractors from Lockheed Martin down to very small companies doing tactical support in terms of business development, marketing connections, writing proposals, and helping do merger and acquisition preparedness, take people for valuation to sell their companies.
Very interesting.
What are the major considerations that a small business needs to make when doing business with the U.S. government, Sid?
Jonathan, when you and I have talked to some of our mutual clients, we always go to the same 5 touch points. First, in today's environment, what's called low price, technically acceptable, and with sequestration, margins are thin, and you have to be technically acceptable, but they base it on low price. So you've got to be able to work at a relatively lower margin than you're accustomed to commercially. Second, there's longer defined acquisition processes using the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It's not going to be as quick a decision as you generally get accustomed to commercially. Your past performance in the federal marketplace is important, and sometimes for a small business, gathering that past performance means teaming or working with other companies. The fourth one is, as a small business, there are set-aside programs for small business, woman-owned, veteran-owned, service-disabled, minority-owned. And having those set-asides and knowing how to work them is important. And finally, the good news is the government always pays. Albeit slowly, you don't lose money working with the federal government. You're going to get paid for what they owe you.
That's interesting. What, should a business be a certain maturity or certain, size before it even tries to engage with the federal government?
There are what's called industry codes that will take a startup company in the micro size under $7 million all the way up to billion-dollar companies. But for a small business, I would suggest that it's not so much size as what you're capable of doing. And the reality is sometimes that can be a 2-person company, 20-person, 50-person certainly is large enough.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan?
Yeah, my experience is that it takes a lot of expertise and time and patience to do business with the government. So unless you're a startup that knows government contracting, I wouldn't have the government as my first customer. It just takes too long to close a deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's interesting is my understanding is that there's this huge number of projects that were supposed to be procured by small businesses, but 90% of them end up not being done by small businesses because small businesses don't apply. Talk about that, Sid.
Well, 35% of the government prime contracts are supposed to go to small business, and some agencies have a hard time doing it. It's tough for a small business to build an aircraft carrier. It's just not going to happen. But there are a lot of agencies like the State Department, Health and Human Services, that are easily able to throw work towards small business and work hard to do that. I think the larger issue is that most small businesses don't know how to go after federal work. And as Jonathan said, there's a long cycle. It's 8 months to 2 years, and a lot of small businesses can't withstand that. Consequently, one of the things that your small businesses down there need to look at is there's no place like home. There are a lot of agencies, especially not agencies, but commands in the military that want to buy from people just outside their gates. They don't need to come to Washington to get that work.
Very good. How do we get your, what's your website, by the way, Sid?
It is sidjaffe.com, SIDJAFFE.com.
All right. Any clothing thoughts from you there, Jonathan?
The government's a good customer in that they pay, but you got to be patient and you got to know that there's a process, and you often need an expert like Sid to get engaged. So that's why I brought Sid on board.
Yeah, I like that. Very good. And by the way, you can learn more about our friend Jonathan B. Smith at chiefoptimizer.com. Thanks to both of you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
All right.
Good business to you.
You bet. When we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at USDailyReview.com, and you're listening to The Price of Business.